In late 1944, with the Allies advancing on all fronts, you'd think that the war has reached the Axis civilian population. In Europe, it has. In the Japanese colonies, it has. But the home islands of Japan have been largely spared. Until now. Soon, US B-29 bombers will set cities like Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Yokohama, Kobe, and Kawasaki on fire, with little more than houses made of wood, bamboo, and paper to hide in. Roaring firestorms will consume hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. The firebombing of Japan is about to begin. This is War Against Humanity, a series of World War II in real time. I'm Spartacus, Olsson. By the end of 1944, the air war in Japan is in a strange sort of limbo as both sides confront failure. On the Japanese side, it's clear now that the Army Air Services and Navy are mostly incapable of challenging the Allies. But on the American side, the B-29 bombing campaign is making little progress towards destroying Japan's economy. So, what's the answer? For both sides, it's time to ratchet up the brutality. Kamikazes smash themselves into American ships. Japanese children build vengeance weapons, and Curtis LeMay begins the incineration of Tokyo. As I covered back in August, the United States has built its strategy to defeat Japan around a massive air offensive centered on the most modern and most powerful bomber in the world, the B-29 Super Fortress. Just like in Europe, it's hoped that the bombers will destroy the Japanese war economy and break civilian and political resolve. Back in June, the B-29s of Curtis LeMay's 20th Bomber Command launched their first raids in Operation Matterhorn on the Japanese home islands from newly constructed bases in Chengdu, China. You can go back and watch one of my previous episodes for more on the build-up to that raid and the aftermath. But by now, it is clear that there are several factors rendering this campaign ineffective. The first is the sheer distance. From Chengdu, the bombers are restricted to hitting Kyushu, and even then only with a reduced bomb load. On top of that, the bombers suffer repeated mechanical failures, with many having to turn home mid-flight. Finally, we've talked about the near impossibility of precision bombing many times on this channel. In Europe, things are hard enough, and the RAF and USAAF scatter their payloads over large areas during attacks on Germany. But things are even worse in Japan, where the B-29s cruise at 30,000 feet and find their bombs blown off target by the jet stream air currents. But Chengdu is only the first stage of Matterhorn, and by October, the campaign is already moving on. When we left the story, American forces had begun construction of new airfields on the recently taken Mariana Islands of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian. From here, the B-29s are able to hit almost all of Japan's main industrial and population belt, a swathe of land which stretches east to west through Japan's major cities from Nagasaki in the west through Hiroshima, Kobe, Kyoto, and on to Tokyo in the east. By October, the first runway on Saipan is complete, and 20th Bomber Command's sister formation, 21st Bomber Command, begins ferrying in its B-29s. The unit's commanding officer, Brigadier General Haywood Hansell, personally flies in the first aircraft on October 12th. Runways on Tinian will be completed from January through to May next year for a total of 6 landing strips. On Guam, 4 runways will be completed between February and July. While easier to supply than Chengdu, the logistical challenge of the Marianas are still daunting. Every ounce of equipment has to be shipped across from the United States. Hansell launches his first bombing missions against the Japanese garrison on Truk and airfields on Iwo Jima. Then, on November 1st, a B-29 reconnaissance plane named Tokyo Rose flies a mission over the Japanese capital. This marks the first sight of an American aircraft in the skies of Tokyo since the Doolittle raid 2.5 years ago. After the cameras come the bombs. The first big raid comes on November 24th. I say big, but this raid is tiny by the standards of the air war in Europe. In Operation San Antonio, Hansell launches 90% of his strength. That's 111 B-29s in an attack on the Nakajima aircraft factory in Musashina in Tokyo. Like the first raids on Kyushu back in June, the mission only has symbolic success. Many bombers run short of fuel and turn back. Others fail to bomb because of mechanical difficulties. Only 35 of the aircraft managed to bomb the primary target, and a mere 48 bombs hit the factory area. Further raids against aircraft factories and docks in Tokyo and Nagoya likewise do little damage. But despite their ineffectiveness, these raids are a significant step in the air war. For too long, the Japanese have relied on geography to protect themselves, and these raids really show the weakness of the air defense systems. Between the start of the strategic bombing campaign in June and throughout the war's end, Japan will average about 2,350 fighters operational each month. But between October 1944 and March 1945, only something like 275 to 285 of these will be assigned to home defense. And by this time in the war, Japan's most highly produced fighters, the Mitsubishi Zero and Nakajima Hayabusa, perform poorly at the high cruising altitude of the B-29 and are too poorly armed to reliably shoot down the bombers. The Japanese do have some more modern fighters like the Kawasaki Hien, Nakajima Hayate, Mitsubishi Raiden, and Kawanishi Shiden. But thanks to the Allied naval blockade and the primacy of resources given to naval construction, Japanese fighter production will never reach adequate levels. The competition between the Army Air Service and the Navy continues in the skies over Japan, where there is no joint air defense network and sometimes outright competition between the two services. The Army Air Service and Navy each have their own geographic responsibilities and their own early warning systems, fighters, and anti-aircraft guns. On the ground, Japanese anti-aircraft guns are consistently in need of more ammunition because production priority goes to shells for the ground army and the Navy. Civil defense is equally poor. I mentioned previously that the construction of the large public shelters common in Europe have never really gotten off the ground in Japan. After the capture of the Marianas, construction does take on a new urgency, but these things take time and raw materials are in short supply. Fire brigades are incredibly small and firefighters poorly trained. Sources vary, but most state that Tokyo, a city with a population of over 6 million, has less than 5 ladder trucks. Water supply is also inadequate. All of this means that even under the relatively meager rain of bombs dropped so far, Japanese civilians are getting a taste of their fate as the government's arrogance dooms them to destruction. Civilians like the schoolboy Kojima Yoshikata, who records his experiences in Nagoya. 13th of December 1944. Today a terrible thing happened. Air raid. Nagoya was bombed by a huge sortie of B-29s. We saw it from the air raid shelters. Those bastards fly around leaving heavy trails of engine exhaust behind them, completely carefree. The anti-aircraft really fired on them, but they were already too far away. Our home was directly under attack. Unable to stop the bombers over the home islands, the Japanese try to strike back at the source. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Service and Navy step up their air raids on the bases in the Marianas. Starting in November and continuing until January 1945, the Japanese managed to destroy 11 superfortresses and damage another 43. In return, they lose between 35 and 40 aircraft of their own. But despite these small successes, it's clear that the Americans dominate the air. Strangled by air and by sea, the Japanese government increasingly radicalizes society in its drive for total war. Japanese school children are put to work on perhaps the most ridiculous retaliation plan of the war. While Hitler puts his deluded faith in the hopes that the V-2 rocket will bring London to its knees, the Japanese can do little more than launch balloons at their enemy. The Fugo incendiary balloons are designed to be launched from Japan, float over the Pacific on the jet stream, and ignite forest fires in America. Even the Japanese know that this won't do anything to stop the bombers. At best, the Army and Navy hope to cause panic and disruption in the United States. But In the end, the balloons will do nothing but bring misery to Japanese schoolchildren. The army mobilizes thousands of schoolgirls to laminate and glue together the paper skins for the balloons. Other children work in the Kukura munitions plant on Kyushu. Here, the conditions are abysmal. The schoolgirls work 12-hour shifts where exhaustion and illness from exposure to the chemicals are common. Working on thin rations, some eventually succumb to malnutrition and others suffer from tuberculosis, neuralgia, and rickets. The first Fugo balloon launches are in November, and by the end of April next year, 9,300 balloons will have been dispatched. And the result? 285 balloons are recorded as landing in the U.S., 1 or 2 small grass fires are started, and 6 civilians are killed by an unexploded balloon. As much as we might scoff at the balloon campaign, it is a sign of the desperation of the Japanese state and military to stave off defeat. Combined with a fanatical state-sponsored ideology of the glory of the emperor and the Japanese nation, this desperation finds its ultimate manifestation in the kamikaze, the pilot-guided suicide missiles which are currently smashing into Allied ships. Eventually translated as divine wind, the term kamikaze is only really used informally during the war but becomes standard terminology afterwards. Right now, the Japanese military refers to the Tokubetsu Kogekitai, or Special Attack Force. The commander, Motoharu Okamura, summarizes his mission. I firmly believe that the only way to swing the war in our favor is to resort to crash-dive attacks with our planes. There is no other way. There will be more than enough volunteers for this chance to save our country. Provide me with 300 planes, and I will turn the tide of the war. As we covered in Indy's special back in October, the first real kamikaze attacks were launched in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The suicide pilots sank an American escort carrier and damaged 6 more. After these first attacks, a propaganda campaign encourages more volunteers to sign up. In October, the Nippon Times quotes a Lieutenant Seiko Nishina. The spirit of the Special Attack Corps is the great spirit that runs in the blood of every Japanese. Every Japanese is capable of becoming a member of the Special Attack Corps. The service is certainly inundated with volunteers, but it's likely that coercion and peer pressure plays a major role in this. And while some are motivated by faith in the emperor, spirituality, or a desire to bring honor to themselves and their families, others have far more prosaic motivations. Like soldiers everywhere, they want to protect their loved ones from what they believe is a barbaric and vengeful enemy. Kamikaze training is brutal. Like so many extremists, the instructors believe that a mix of physical brutalization and ideological indoctrination will produce the right fighting spirit. When the time comes for their final mission, the pilots toast with a cup of sake, read their death poems, and pack away the prayer flags decorated by their families. Then they take off for the last time. Their training manual has given them precise instruction on which part of the enemy carrier to attack. Over the winter, kamikaze-like tactics will be extended to the skies over Japan itself. The air service will form a special attack unit of pilots to ram their aircraft into the B-29s. Unlike their counterparts attacking U.S. shipping, these pilots are ordered to bail out after the collision. But while a carrier is big and slow, the B-29 is relatively small, very fast, and bristling with defensive guns. The special attack unit has little luck taking them down. The Japanese may be struggling to shoot down the super fortress, but the bombing campaign is still having little real impact. As the end of the year draws closer, General of the Air Force, Henry Hap Arnold, grows increasingly frustrated with Hansel's 21st Bomber Command in Saipan. Not only are they making little contribution to winning the war, but they are not justifying the massive cost of the B-29 program. Accordingly, Hap Arnold decides it's time for a change of command. Because of his success in turning around 20th Bomber Command's operational readiness, and because operations over at Chengdu are winding down, Arnold decides to send LeMay over to the Marianas to take over from Hansel. Arnold's old unit will be relocated to India to support British and Indian forces in the Southeast Asian theater. Ironically, just as he is relieved of duty, Hansel will have a rare success with precision bombing. On January 19th, 62 of his super fortresses will practically shut down the Kawasaki aircraft factory in Akashi. The bombers dropped 620 bombs and hit every important building. The facility, which supplies 1/6 of Japan's airframes and 1/8 of its aero engines, will suffer a 90% cut in production. Unfortunately for Hansel, the full scale of the destruction is not revealed until later, and anyway, Arnold will have already made up his mind. After taking command, LeMay will at first continue launching ineffective precision bombing raids, but he will also run area bombing experiments with incendiaries, something that Hansel had opposed. As I have discussed previously, incendiary bombing is not a new idea. Experiments concluded back in the US have already demonstrated that densely packed Japanese cities with wood and paper homes are far more vulnerable than European cities to firebombing. On top of that, firebombing is considered a simple way to hit the dispersed network of small subcontractors which supply components to Japanese factories. LeMay himself has proven the effectiveness of the tactic, launching an incendiary raid on Japanese-occupied Hankou in China in December. The attack leaves Hankou burning for 3 days. The first big incendiary raids on Japan will come in February 1945. On February 3rd, LeMay will send 129 B-29s to Kobe, armed with a mixed load of fragmentation bombs and incendiaries. The raid will leave 2.5 million square feet of the industrial southwest of the city burnt. LeMay's first incendiary raid on Tokyo will be on February 25th. A force of 172 B-29s will leave behind 28 million square feet of smoldering embers and set in place the final strategy for the American bombing of Japan. It is a strategy that will damage the Japanese economy, but that is an economy that is already being strangled by the Allied blockade, and it's a strategy which does so at a cost of an incredible amount of civilian lives, dooming hundreds of thousands more people to be blown to pieces or burnt in their cities. Those are hundreds of thousands of people who have only been placed in the firing line because of the crimes of their own state, an extremist government and military which launched a naked war of aggression and is now reaping what it sowed. An extremist state which sends its bravest young men to die in futile suicidal attacks against an overwhelmingly powerful enemy coalition. As 1944 draws to a close, the swirling cauldron of death and destruction only grows in ferocity as the war draws to its inevitable conclusion. With the perspective of time past, it seems insane. No, it is insane. For the Japanese, it must be clear that the war is almost certainly lost, and yet the Japanese send young men to their certain death in flying bombs. For the Americans, it must be clear that victory is just a question of time, and yet they are determined to let go any restraint and burn thousands of little children in their cots and beds, if it only shortens the war by a day and spares American lives. Is the outcome so certain when your eyes are crimson with blood rage fueled by a premature death of your comrades? If your mind is clouded by dark demons whispering that the future of everything you love depends on avoiding defeat? How extreme are you willing to become? If your enemy's eyes are crimson, if you know they are possessed by demons, do you even feel that you have any other choice than victory at any cost or annihilation? That is what war does to us. Consumes our souls with visions of death and defeat in a world become raging inferno. Better it be your victory and their defeat. Better it be their death for your life. Better burn their children than they yours. Is restraint even possible when this is where you have come to live? It better be, for if we all succumb to the demonic blood rage, there is no victory worth winning, for we have then become the demons. The suffering of our enemies shall be ours, and we will inherit that pain to generations to come, to our children, for whom we thought we were fighting. For sooner or later, they will weigh the justness and honor of our actions, and in shame find us wanting. Never forget.